They called her lonely. They whispered she's different. They laughed when she walked alone. They stared when she sat. By herself, they questioned her worth because no one stood beside her. But what they didn't know is she never needed noise to feel powerful. She never begged for company to feel complete. She never chased friendships just to prove she belonged. She was born with her own light. Her silence was strength. Her solitude was gold. She was not alone. She was aligned. She was not broken. She was building. She was not empty. She was evolving. Every step she took without a crowd made her unstoppable. Every night she spent without texts made her untouchable every time. She smiled without reason. She became unforgettable. Because when a woman walks alone, she writes her own rules, speaks her own truth, owns her own throne. And nothing is louder than the silence of a woman who chooses herself. She learned early that friendship was presented as the greatest currency, but she never felt the rush of that tide. In crowded rooms where laughter rang out like bells, she stood at the edge, observing the choreography of connection. Others spoke in sync, as if born, while she listened to the subtle music of her own heartbeat. When invitations fluttered past her inbox unopened, she refused to chase them like a stray butterfly. Instead, she sat with her solitude and learned her own name. In those quiet hours, she discovered that absence of companionship is not absence of worth. While the world told her that having friends validated her existence, she found validation in the stillness of her breath. She began to write letters to herself with words she needed to hear. You're enough, you're brilliant, you're unbreakable. Handwriting as if it was scripture carved on ancient stone. It felt the fire ignite behind her ribs. There were nights she reached for blink, recalling faces she once trusted and voices that tears came sometimes uninvited, but she did not apologize to the mirror. She let them fall and washed away every how could they, every what did I do. From the wreckage of disappointment, she salvaged the strongest fragments of her spirit. 8 fragments stepping across the river. When morning came, she greeted the sun with gratitude instead of resentment. She learned that friendship without choice is hollow, and that true connection must be earned, not demanded. So she made a pact with herself as equality. She vowed to cultivate relationships that mirrored her light rather than drained it. Companions that she carried like a torch through the darkest alleyways of her mind. She practiced kindness towards strangers on the street in the smallest gestures. A nod, a smile, a holding of the door. Because she believed generosity carved out spaces for genuine bonds to form. In giving without expectation, she planted seeds of reciprocity that might someday bloom into understanding. She discovered that when you extend your hand without fear of rejection, you cultivate courage bigger than any fear of loneliness. In the silence of her apartment, she built an altar of self-care. Fresh flowers on the windowsill, journals lined up like soldiers, cushions piled up, like clouds, warm mugs of tea waiting to soothe her palms. She practiced morning affirmations. With each ritually reinforced her authority, she realized that she was both architect and inhabitant of her inner world, and that will external storm. By the close of this chapter, she was no longer the woman defined by empty invitations or unreturned messages. She transformed into the woman who courted her own company and discovered that her presence was a gift. She learned that being without friends did not equate to being without power. In owning her solitude, she reclaimed every ounce of her voice, every beat of her purpose. And in that reclamation, she began to rise. She woke before dawn, the hush of early morning, a candle for her intentions. The sky was a pale promise. The world still breathing in its dreams. In that fragile hour, she sat at her desk, journal open, pen poised above smooth paper. She wrote not of regrets, but of possibilities, mapping constellations of her aspirations, learning a new language, mastering a difficult yoga pose, volunteering at the local women's shelter. Each goal took shape as a star she could reach for in the darkness. As the sun rose over the city skyline, she stepped into her running shoes and hit the pavement. Every stride was a declaration. She would not be detained by isolation. She measured her distance, not in miles, but in moments of self-discovery. The steady rhythm of footfalls against concrete, her lungs expanding with purpose, her mind clearing with each exhale. With every hill she climbed, she felt the pull of gravity lessen, as if she were ascending beyond the limitations she once imposed on herself. Back home, she prepared a nourishing breakfast, oats steeped in almond milk, topped with berries that tasted like resilience, and a drizzle of honey that whispered of sweetness found even in hardship. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, reminding herself that self-care was never selfish but essential. Her body was the vessel through which her spirit would continue its journey. Midday brought a challenge, an invitation to join a women's networking luncheon. The familiar knot of anxiety tightened in her chest, a reminder of past dismissals and cold shoulders. She hesitated at the threshold, heart pounding with the question she had silently asked 1,000 times. What if they judge me for walking in alone? But she inhaled deeply and reminded herself of the vows she'd written at dawn to honor her courage, to pursue growth even when her voice trembled. She crossed the lobby with chin lifted and entered the room. Inside, tables were clustered like islands of conversation. She scanned for an opening, then approached a table where two women were laughing softly over coffee. Her voice wavered as she asked if she might join them, but they welcomed her with genuine smiles, patting the seat beside her. She introduced herself, sharing a piece of her story, how she'd learned to embrace solitude before learning to embrace community. They listened with curiosity, their expressions softening as they recognized strength in her journey. By the end of the luncheon, she exchanged numbers, promising to connect on LinkedIn and meet again for a workshop on leadership. She stepped back out into the afternoon, feeling lighter than she had in months. The invitation that once felt like a threat had become a bridge, a path toward connections built on mutual respect rather than empty camaraderie. That evening, she returned to her altar of self-care and lit a candle, dancing like a beacon of resilience. She added a fresh entry to her journal. Today, I leaned into fear and discovered a doorway. The sentence felt monumental, as though ink on the page could hold the weight of her triumph. Before sleep claimed her, she reflected on the lesson woven into her day. Never have fine. That solitude teaches you how to love your own company, and that love becomes the foundation upon which genuine friendships can be built. She realized she had not waited for others to validate her worth. She had built a life so rich in intention and authenticity that companionship would now be an enhancement, a necessity. As she closed her eyes, the candle's glow flickered and settled into calm. In her dreams, she walked through fields of wildflowers, the petals whispering encouragement with every step. She was no longer defined by the absence of friends, but by the presence of her own unwavering belief. And with that belief guiding her, she drifted into sleep, ready to awaken tomorrow. All creating morning light spilled through her curtains, and she stretched like waking from a dream of possibility. Today, she would confront her own expectations and challenge the stories she told herself about worth and belonging. She dressed in confidence, dark jeans and a crisp blouse that hugged her shoulders like dot armor, and carried her journal in a tote bag as both shield and talisman. She arrived at the community center where she'd signed up to teach a workshop on creative writing. The announcement board still bore her name in faded marker, but she did not waver. She stepped inside the room, scattered with empty chairs, and set up her notes on a small table, fingers tracing each line she had written days before. This was no ordinary class. It was her declaration that she could lead and inspire. Solitude sharpened her instincts rather than dulled them. Poetic. As participants trickled in, women of all ages and backgrounds, she greeted each with a genuine warmth that struck. She recognized the flicker of uncertainty in their eyes, because she had, when walking into unfamiliar, she invited them to take a seat. And when the last woman arranged herself, she tapped the markers and smiled. Writing, she began, is the act of listening to the quietest voice in the room. That one inside you. She paused, letting her own echo settle. When I started writing here, I had no friends to read my words. And no one to tell me what the guy will say. But I learned that the page doesn't judge, and that blank space can hold infinite possibilities. She guided them through prompts that asked for memories they'd tucked away, emotions they'd hidden behind polite smiles. At first, the room hummed with hesitance as women flipped open their notebooks, pens hovering uncertainly. But as she read aloud a passage she'd written on solitude, how it gave her clarity she'd never known in a crowded room. She saw heads nodding and pens scratching. By halfway through, the room vibrated with shared stories. A woman in the front row read a paragraph about feeling invisible as a child. Another spoke betrayal by a friend who vanished overnight. Each confession was met with solidarity, a reminder that vulnerability breeds, ship is absent. After the workshop, several attendees linked, asking her for feedback and advice on next steps. She encouraged them to form a writing circle, an invitation to build community on their own terms. She reminded them the cries, but the carnal gestures and shared purpose. When she packed her bag, the weight felt lighter. She realized that leading others had filled her own cup in ways she hadn't anticipated. Solitude had taught her self-reliance. Guiding others taught her generosity. She stepped outside into the afternoon sun and noticed the city sounded different. Softer, more melodic, as if applauding her triumph. On her way home, she stopped at a quiet cafe and ordered tea, settling into a corner table with her journal. She wrote today, I transformed my solitude into service, and felt the truth of those words pulse through her veins. She added lines about hope, about how emptiness can become a canvas for compassion, about how women who walk communities. As dusk fell, she returned to her apartment and lit the altar candle once more. She placed a fresh flower beside it, a symbol of growth born from stillness. She inhaled its scent and whispered a promise to herself that she would continue to rise, continue to share, continue to turn solitude into a sanctuary for herself and for every woman who felt she had no friends. In that promise, she found not just purpose, but a path forward, one written in ink and illuminated by her own unwavering light. She woke before sunrise and carried the lessons of solitude like a banner in her heart. Today, she would extend her sanctuary beyond the walls of her apartment and invite other women to step into its glow. She dressed in a tailored blazer that spoke of quiet confidence, not jean that reflected each ounce. In her tote, she packed journals, pens, and an embroidered cloth she had painted with the words, your story matters. At the community library, she transformed a small conference room into a circle of possibility. Folding chairs formed a ring around a low table where she placed steaming mugs of chai and a vase of wildflowers. Women trickled in, some curious, some hesitant, some eager for an anchor in their own storm of loneliness. She greeted each by name, offering a gentle smile and a moment of eye contact that said, "I see you." She began the gathering with the grounding exercise. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and feel the weight of your own presence. When silence, solidarity, solitude, and it takes to stand alone before inviting them to share their stories. One by one, they spoke of friendship lost to time, of betrayals that stung like acid rain, spent invisible in bustling crowds. Each confession was met not with judgment, but with hushed respect, a silent space for their pain and their strength. She guided them through a creative visualization. Imagine your future self surrounded by companions who honor your truth and uplift your voice. Encourage every image they conjured with affirmations and gentle prompts as pens scratched across journals. When the exercise ended, she asked them to write letters to those future friends, what they would share, how they would laugh, the ways they would support each other. By the close of the session, several women exchanged contact information and promised to reconvene for a collaborative art project. She watched them depart with shoulders straighter and smiles lighter, feeling the surge of collective empowerment ripple through her chest. In that moment, she understood that her solitude had been an apprenticeship. In empathy. Later that week, she hosted a virtual workshop for women in remote villages and urban high-rises alike. Through the screen, she saw faces lit by morning light and flickering lamps, testament to the universality. She led them in exercises adapted for digital space, group storytelling circles, shared playlists that spoke of resilience, live poised to chart. When the chat filled with messages of gratitude, she felt the war, cultural divides. She chronicled these experiences on her newly launched blog, weaving together anecdotes, practical tips, and poetic reflections. Her blog posts became digital campfires around which women gathered to comment, share resources, and organize local meetups. As her readership grew, she invited guest contributors, therapists, artists, activists into the fold, transforming her platform into a mosaic of voices united by the alchemy of loneliness into purpose. In each new role, mentor, facilitator, storyteller, she discovered facets of herself that solitude had refined. Her empathy sharpened, her vision clarified, her resolve steeled. She felt the power of her narrative ripple outward, touching lives she would never meet in person. And every time she saw a woman claim her voice in response to her own storytelling, she felt a joy that reminded her how rich to be honored rather than feared. As dusk settled, she returned home to her altar, which now bore objects gifted by women she had guided. A painted stone, a hand-woven bracelet, a folded paper crane. She lit the candle and placed these tokens around it like constellations on her altar of possibility. In her journal she wrote, "Today I turned solitude into service and found that the greatest friendships bloom from seeds of shared strength." She closed the notebook and whispered a promise. "Tomorrow I will rise again to light the way for another." She awoke with a quiet smile, the first soft light of dawn streaming through her window like an invitation. Today marked a turning point, not because she would conquer some grand challenge, but because she would celebrate the journey that had brought her here. Why poet? She dressed in a flowy skirt and a tailored blouse, comfortable yet poised, an embodiment she found between strength and grace. Her first stop was the local women's shelter, where she volunteered once a month. As she carried boxes of supplies into the foyer, she spotted familiar faces, women who, like her, had once felt invisible, unanchored by friendship or family. Their eyes lit up at her approach, and she greeted each with the warmth of kinship she cultivated through her own solitude. They sat together in a circle of folding chairs, sharing tea and stories. She listened as they spoke of fresh starts, of resilience born from hardship. And as they spoke, she saw reflections of her own evolution mirrored back at her. She walked through the city streets, the chatter of life around her, no longer a cacophony, but a symphony of human experience. She paused at a street musician, dropped a few coins in his open case, and offered a genuine smile, an exuberance of shared artistry and survival. No matter how small, she recognized the threads of connection weaving themselves into the tapestry of her life. That afternoon, she met with the writing circle she'd helped form. They gathered in the park beneath a sprawling banyan tree, journals open on lapsed pens, dancing across pages. When it was her turn to read, she shared the opening lines of her upcoming blog post, a tribute to the power of solitude to forge empathy and ignite action. As she read, she saw nods of affirmation, heard the soft inhalations of understanding, and felt the gentle clutch of communal support. She closed her journal to applause that surprised her with its sincerity. And she realized that friendship, when shaped by intention and nurtured by authenticity, could be more profound than any she'd imagined before. Evening found her back at her altar, which now held not only candles but photographs and letters from women she guided across the continent. She lit the central candle, its flame steady and bright, and placed a new photograph beside it. An image of her with the writing circle, arms linked with solidarity. She reached for her journal and began to write, "I used to measure my worth by the absence of companions. Now I know my worth is measured by the depth of my journey." Her final task before sleep was to record a short video message for her blog subscribers. She spoke softly, but with conviction. To every woman who's ever felt alone, you carry within you an ocean of strength. Your solitude is not a void, but a crucible where your true self is forged. Embrace it, honor it, and let it guide you toward the connections that resonate with your soul. She uploaded the video and watched as comments and hearts began to flow in messages from women thanking her for giving voice to their invisible truths. As she lay down that night, she reflected on how far she'd come. From the woman who thought solitude was a sentence to the woman who recognized it as an invitation to growth. She no longer feared empty rooms or unread messages. She saw them as spaces waiting to be filled with purpose. In her dream, she walked through golden fields, not alone, by the spirit of every woman she retouched, and every woman yet to find her own light. When the first rays of dawn kissed the horizon, she would rise again, not to chase friendship, but to celebrate the beauty of walking her own path, and to extend her hand to those ready to walk beside her. Because now she understood that the rarest friendships blossom from the soil of solitude, watered by self-love and nurtured by the courage to choose one's own light.